Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
America, there's no happy ending. Will the left finally turn America into Amerika with a K? Will it turn it into something unrecognizable? Well, our guest today on the show is going to be talking about this, and he says there's no happy ending, especially when you look at what has happened after the elections with the nation so divided. And perhaps he says there's going to be no happy ending because if Biden wins, half of America or more will feel that they were cheated, perhaps rightfully so. And they're going to be worried about where America is going. That it will be, I think it was Obama's words, fundamentally changed. But then if Biden wins, then if Trump wins, the other side's going to feel, what? We already know Biden won the election and Trump is stealing it from us. I just am imagining terrible scenes on the streets of America. So we're going to be talking about this on the show today. You are welcome to call in if you are listening live. The show airs on Tuesday morning here in Israel between 7 to 8 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time, or if it's between midnight to 1 a.m. Midnight to 1 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time, or if it's between 7 to 8 a.m. Israel time, holy time, then you can call into the show. Our numbers are on the top of our homepage at israelnewstalkradio.com. I think this is going to be a very interesting show. I think that we need to understand what might happen and be prepared for it. And be prepared to fight for it as well. America is a great country, offering liberty, offering the Constitution, which is something that a lot of people want to tear up, unfortunately. We're going to be going into all of this today on the show. Don't go anywhere.
The return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel was prophesied in the Bible thousands of years ago and is coming true today. Shalom. Join me, Joshua Wander, on Israel Unplugged. Listen in as we delve into the spiritual and physical aspects of the Jewish return to Zion. We'll discuss the biblically mandated, historic, and of course practical understandings of this incredible transition from exile to redemption. That's Israel Unplugged, every Monday on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
America, there's no happy ending. That's what our guest says, and we're going to ask him about that. He says that if the left wins, if the Democrats take over, America could be turned into something unrecognizable. Our guest is Alex Newman. He's an award-winning international journalist, educator, author, and speaker. He serves as president of Liberty Sentinel Media, and his work has been repeatedly highlighted by Drudge, Breitbart, Fox News, and several other outlets. He has authored several books, including Crimes of the Educators and Deep State, the Invisible Government Behind the Scenes. And you can visit his website at libertysentinel.org. All right, so it's after the U.S. elections. The United States population is still divided. Half the country claims that Biden won, and give it up, crybabies. That's what they're saying. And the other half, or more, of the American public are crying fraud, that Trump did win, And they're going to have a mass gathering in Washington where hopefully they will be able to prove it. They state, and rightfully so, that all Americans should be concerned about voter fraud because it's not only the presidential elections that the power elites can manipulate, but there are important local elections that directly impact citizens, and they can prevent fair elections there as well. Now, I recently watched an interview or two with our guest, and he's saying that Amerika could become completely unrecognizable if the Democrats take power, and that whoever wins the elections, there won't be a happy ending. And I've been saying the same thing on my show, that whoever wins, either side will call the other side cheaters, that they stole the election, and I don't see that either side will take this lying down. So getting back to your statement, Alex, welcome to the show. There's no happy ending. Where would you like to start?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Tamar. It's a pleasure to be with you. And, you know, it is a crisis moment in American history. In fact, I would argue that if this isn't the most dangerous time in our entire history, it's certainly right up there in the top three. And I don't say that lightly. We've had a civil war where hundreds of thousands of Americans were killed. We've had invasions by the British, right? They invaded us again in 1812. They made it all the way to the White House and burned it down. So we've had some very perilous times in our nation's history, and we are in another one of those right now. I think to anybody who's paying attention, to anybody who's intellectually honest, to anybody who's looked at the evidence, it's beyond established that there was massive election fraud. And when I say massive election fraud, I mean it was so huge. You really have to bury your head in the sand not to see the evidence. I've read through many of the affidavits that have been filed in the court cases. I've seen these irregularities. I've interviewed people who've witnessed these things, who've put their signature on sworn affidavits made under penalty of perjury, right? These people can go to jail if they are lying. And then you see the media turn around and say there's no evidence. Excuse me, I've read through dozens of the affidavits. This is eyewitness testimony given under penalty of perjury. That's the very definition of evidence. In fact, it's some of the highest quality evidence that you can have in a court of law. So the media at this point is just blatantly lying. And you know, where this goes from here, I think we have several possibilities. All of them are bad. January 6th is, of course, the next big date when Congress meets to consider the electoral votes sent by the states.
Right.
And I think we're going to see some fireworks.
So the system works, though, where if it's not in the interest of the powers that be, the court system, or even higher than that, they just say, well, it's not in the public interest. And that's basically what they've been telling Trump. He wants to bring it to court. The judges don't even want to take the case. And so what do you do in a case like that?
It's true. And one of the interesting things is that the people who are trying to ignore or downplay the vote fraud keep saying, well, the courts have thrown it all out. Yeah, but if you look at the rulings, they almost none of them have actually touched on the substance of the cases, on the allegations, on the evidence, on the fraud. And the ones that did touch on these things actually found in Trump's favor. For example, there was a case in Virginia about the legality of some of these maneuvers that took place at the last moment. We have a Constitution. That's the supreme law of the land in the United States. And the Constitution says that the state legislatures will determine how an election in a state is to be run. And yet in Pennsylvania, in many of these states, we had state bureaucrats, we had governors, we had state secretaries of state willy-nilly issuing new regulations, getting rid of the laws passed by the legislature. And so when a court in Pennsylvania looked at this, they said, wow, yeah, this was totally unconstitutional. You're not allowed to do this. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court ended up throwing that out, but they didn't question the ruling itself. They threw it out on a technicality. And that's what we've seen over and over and over again, including on some of the high-profile cases, like the one that was brought by 21 states, including my state of Florida, to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court never actually ruled on the merits of the case. All they claimed was that the states didn't have standing. In my opinion, that's absolutely ludicrous. The Supreme Court said that the states that were filing the lawsuit could not show direct evidence of harm as a result of these allegations that they were making, and so the Supreme Court refused to hear the case. That's crazy. How can you say that there's no harm from a fraudulent election that ended up putting a fraudulent imposter in the highest office of the federal government. It's absolutely crazy. And so obviously we couldn't get justice in the courts. That's a shame. Now, the next opportunity is going to be Congress. I know to foreigners this looks very bizarre. In fact, I think to many Americans this looks very bizarre because most of us didn't learn civics in public school. But we have a process, and the next step in this process is the Congress will meet on January 6th under the leadership of Vice President Mike Pence, who will be serving as President of the Senate throughout these proceedings. And they will then consider the electors, the slates of electors that each state is going to be sending to Congress. Now, there are multiple different possibilities here. You have many, many people, including very prominent conservatives, including the President of the United States himself, pressuring the Vice President, Pence, as well as Republicans in Congress, in both the House and the Senate, to use this opportunity to expose the fraud and to overturn the fraud. Whether that'll happen remains to be seen, but that's the next big opportunity. And if that fails, Tamar, there are some more extreme options that are being considered. One of them is to invoke the Insurrection Act. So our Constitution provides that the federal government is allowed to call up the militia into federal service if there are certain conditions. One of those conditions is an insurrection, right, where you have a rebellion against the authority of the United States. Another is if you have an invasion, and another is if you need the militia to enforce the laws of the Union. So we have a few areas where the federal government is allowed to create laws. Obviously, those laws need to be enforced. We didn't have an FBI until relatively recently in our history, and so oftentimes those would be enforced by the militia. Well, our Congress delegated the authority to summon the militia or to use the armed forces for these purposes to the president in the early 1800s. This was during the administration of Thomas Jefferson. And under the Insurrection Act, the president has the authority to either summon the militia, which, you know, the Congress kind of did away with the unorganized militia over a century ago at this point, but we still have our state militaries. It's called the National Guard. They're typically under the command of the governors. However, the president can bring those into federal service if one of these criteria are met. And so Trump has a number of very, very senior people that he's listening to, including General Michael Flynn. This was his first national security advisor who was taken out by the deep state very early on in his administration. He's also got many former retired military leaders, people like General McInerney. He was one of the top generals in the U.S. Air Force. In fact, he was in charge of America's nuclear arsenal. You've got people from the Navy. You've got numerous high-ranking former officials who are saying Trump needs to invoke the Insurrection Act if it comes down to it, because as they explain it, this is not just regular vote fraud. You know, this isn't just some cronies trying to get their politician on the county commission so that they can steer, you know, lucrative government contracts to their company. This is something much different. This is something much broader. And what they're saying is this is actually an effort to overthrow our constitutional republic. This took place, they're saying, including many high-ranking people in the intelligence community, including, by the way, the Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, that the Communist Chinese were involved in this fraudulent election. If that is true, and it very much seems to be the case, then, as these people say, the president has an obligation to make sure we don't hand the office of the presidency and control of the armed forces over to a hostile foreign power or their agent, in this case, Joe Biden. So it's a very extreme situation. I recognize this sounds very intensive, sounds very dramatic, and that's because it is, Tamar.
So I'm just wondering, when you talk about the Constitution, I'm remembering back in the days of George W., where even he was rumored to have said when he was trying to make the North American Union with Mexico and Canada, and he was saying, I hate saying these two words together, but he was saying, what's the Constitution? It's just a goddamned piece of paper. And there are so many people in America today that nothing would make them happier than to throw out the U.S. Constitution. They're taking down statues, they're erasing history, they're rewriting history, and the Constitution just seems to be a bone in the throat of the leftists. And that's why I see so many similarities between Israel and the United States, in the sense of, if you want to look at the globalists, that we are the enemies of the global, world agenda, one world government, because America has the Constitution, has the right to bear arms, and Israel also. Everyone here is packed. And we have our Constitution, which is the Torah. We are a Jewish state, and you cannot have a Jewish state in a in a one world government. You can't, you can't have borders. You can't have all of those things. So we're going to a break right now. But when we get back, I'd like you to give us, if you can, Alex, a scenario in your mind what we could be facing if either side wins. You'll tell us what the scenario could be if Biden wins or if Trump stays in the White House. We'll be right back, everybody. Don't go anywhere.
Hi, everyone. This is Andrea Siminto from Jerusalem, inviting you to drop everything and join me on my show, Pull Up a Chair. We'll visit this week's quirky stories, meet fabulous guests, and discover my Israel. Together, we'll laugh, shout, and explain the topics that make us say, hey, we've got to talk about that. So get comfortable and pull up a chair with me, Andrea Siminto, every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
All right, we are back here at the Tamar Yonah Show on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, and our guest is Alex Newman. He's an award-winning international journalist. He's the author of the book Crimes of the Educators and Deep State, his website, libertysentinel.org, and he's here talking to us about America. There's no happy ending, and I can see how he says that when you look at a country, sadly, so divided, and each one already, getting ready to go out and fight. It's not a pretty situation what we've seen in the streets in this last year. And Alex, before the break, I was talking to you about how we might see a scenario if one side wins. So where would you like to start?
Yeah, you said something really crucial before we went to the break, and I want to pick up there if that's okay, and that is the Constitution of the United States, the significance of the Constitution, the growing hostility that we see in our country, and of course the relationship and the links that has with the people of Israel, going really all the way back to ancient Israel. A lot of the framers, the people who put together our system of government, they actually looked to what what you guys call the Torah, what they called the Old Testament, for inspiration on what a government ought to look like. And when you look at our founding documents, including our Declaration of Independence, including our Constitution, these biblical precepts come through very, very clearly. For example, in our Declaration of Independence, our founders said it was a self-evident truth that God created us and that God endowed us with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, property, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These come straight out of what God revealed to Moses in the Ten Commandments, right? He said, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not murder. And so from that you extrapolate, well, God has given you a right to life, therefore no human being has the right to take that away from you. God said, thou shalt not steal, and therefore you have a right to property that exists prior to the government, right? The government doesn't give you these rights. The government merely exists to protect the rights that God already gave you. So this is the foundation of the United States. This is what most Americans, unfortunately, were never taught in their so-called public education. I really would argue whether we can call it an education or not in any legitimate sense of the term. And I've noticed that, especially among the religious people of Israel, we have this affinity. I was actually in Israel some years ago. I had the opportunity to go to the Knesset and spend some time with, at the time, he was the deputy speaker of the Knesset, Moshe Feiglin. And I found that there really is a powerful liberty movement in Israel where we share these same ideas. It's God who blessed us with liberty. It's God who said in the Torah that you should proclaim liberty throughout the land and to all the inhabitants thereof, right? Liberty is of God. And unfortunately, more and more we see America becoming an apostate nation and turning away from God and mocking God, and that manifests itself also in a hostility to a political document that enshrines these biblical precepts. And that is really a great danger. America was unique in that sense. There was almost no semblance of this kind of government being created from the ground up, except, of course, ancient Israel, that was based on these ideas that God is supreme, God has given people rights and responsibilities, and the government is in charge of merely enforcing that and making it into a workable system. So to lose that would be a tragedy, but I think that is what the deep state, if you want to use a term that's now in popular usage in the United States, hopes to accomplish. They would love to see a civil war because it would discredit the U.S. Constitution. It would discredit the principles that this country is founded on, and it would facilitate the move toward what these globalists call their New World Order. Now they're talking about this great reset, basically a fundamental transformation of the globe to get rid of private property rights, to get rid of individual liberty, to get rid of nation states, right? Like the state of Israel, the United States of America, and move us all into this freakish global system where our liberties would not be respected, our religious freedoms would not be respected, and we would essentially end up as serfs.
So give us a scenario, if you can, of how I want to ask you about if one side wins, but I want to just follow up on the Civil War idea, because in the 1800s, in the 1865 or whenever it was, the Civil War, you had the North against the South. But today, everything is all mixed up. Neighbors can be of different political leanings. How would a Civil War, how would that take place in America today?
Yeah, it would be disastrous. It would be so messy. It would be so grotesque. It's difficult to think about. Unfortunately, I think it's a very real possibility. We even see now very senior people, including in the media, including in the military, discussing this. They're very concerned that if it broke out, the military, especially the rank and file, would all go with Donald Trump. And you'd have basically the media and remnants of the Democrat Party against the American people. But it would be very, very difficult. You're right. We don't have any clear fault line like we had back in the 1860s during the Civil War, where we had states that went with the Union and states that went with the Confederacy. It would be incredibly messy. You would have neighbors turning on each other. You would have mass confusion as well, because we don't have two sides with uniforms, with separate flags. It would just be a total mess. And I think there's an added complication here, in that is that there are foreign powers that are very, very interested in all of this, and that there is a treasonous fifth column within this country that's existed for decades, for generations really, that is fully willing to cooperate with hostile foreign powers in the destruction of the United States and in any civil war. And a lot of this came out. A lot of people don't realize Barack Obama got his political career started in the home of a communist terrorist by the name of Bill Ayers. And one of the things, he was the founder of a terrorist group called the Weather Underground. And we had an FBI operative who infiltrated the leadership of this terrorist organization. This was back in the 1960s. They bombed the Pentagon. They bombed the Capitol, where our Congress meets. They bombed the State Department. They bombed police departments. They murdered police officers and then bombed their funerals. It was a very turbulent time. And the FBI operative who infiltrated the leadership of this group, his name was Larry Grathwohl. You can find this interview that I'm mentioning on YouTube still to this day. He said that once he got into the leadership of this organization, he asked them, so what's the plan? What are we going to do? And they talked about their desire to basically collapse the United States, invite hostile foreign powers in here, including communist China, including the Soviet Union, the communist Cuban dictatorship, etc., dividing America up into pieces, interning tens of millions of Americans into re-education camps. And then the FBI agent, Larry Grathwohl, asked the leadership of the group, well, what do we do about the ones who can't be re-educated? These diehard, religious fanatics and the capitalists who won't give up their property. What do we do about them? And the response that they gave him, according to Grathwohl, and again, everybody can go find this interview on their own, he said, well, we're going to have to liquidate probably 25 million of those people. That would have been more than 10% of the population of this country at this time. And those people never went away, Tamar. They rebranded, they became professors, they became politicians, they became activist leaders, and they took over the tax-exempt foundations with billions of dollars. So those people are very much still around. They're very, very active in the political realm, and they would love nothing more than to collapse the United States as we have known it, to replace it with this monstrosity that they've told us they want to build.
And what's the name of this group?
The terrorist group that I mentioned is called the Weather Underground.
Okay.
And this was founded by Bill Ayers and his wife Bernadine Dorn. And we know from U.S. intelligence that they were very closely cooperating with Cuban intelligence, the DGI, which of course was a puppet of Soviet intelligence over in Moscow. So we have had this ongoing war against the United States going back many, many decades. And unfortunately, the leaders, the activists who were involved in that, have now moved themselves into positions of authority. They're now overseeing the education system and brainwashing our young people. And all of this can be documented and proven. I'm not revealing anything secret or any speculation or theories or connecting any dots. All of this is part of the public record.
Okay, and so you're saying, and what's their motives? I mean, why?
Well,
why,
I think
why do they want to do this?
It goes right back to what we were touching on earlier. They hate God. This is very much like Karl Marx. Karl Marx had a vicious hatred of God. He's often portrayed as an atheist, but if you read his writings, it's very clear that he wasn't an atheist. His poetry, for example, was filled with references to God, never as some sort of imaginary, creation of mankind, but rather as a force, an entity that he loathed and hated. He said he wants to destroy everything that God created. And so if you look at their objectives, what you find is in every case, they are in complete opposition to what God has commanded in the Bible, going back all the way to the very beginning of the Torah, right? When God talks about marriage, when God talks about creating male and female, when God talks about private property, on every front, they want to overturn the divine order that God has given to man for man's benefit and replace it with their own twisted version of it. So God said, "Thou shalt not steal." They want to steal everything. God said he created man and woman. They tell our children that they can, chop off their private parts and take hormones and become whatever gender they want. This is literally what they're teaching children all over the United States today. God said a marriage is between a man and a woman. They tell us that it could be anything today. And it's just a small sample of where they're going. They want to overturn everything that God has created, everything God has ordained, and that's their objective, I believe, Tamar.
Alex, we're going to a break in a minute, but very quickly, I heard you in an interview saying that there was some type of statistics that like 27% or 30-some% of 19-year-olds or kids today in Southern California, I don't know what gender they are. Do you know what I'm talking about?
There was a study by the University of California at Los Angeles, and what they found, this was even a couple years ago now, they found that 27% of California's children ages 12 to 17 are now self-describing as gender non-conforming. So they're boys who reject that they're boys or girls who reject that they're girls. And that number has probably increased quite significantly since that study came out. And
you said that when you were growing up, you never met a boy that thought he was a girl or a girl that thought he was a boy, and yet
never.
Today... That's what we're seeing.
I mean, the word transgender wasn't in the dictionary. It was such a fringe phenomenon that nobody would have even thought about it. And yet now it's being taught to little children all over the United States and all over the Western world as well.
All right. Well, just before we go to the break, I just want to say I always call these people that you're talking about, the Weather Underground and all these leftists, as the Tower of Babel people, the people who want to build their tower up to heaven, dethrone God, and become the masters of their own destiny. We'll be right back.
Are you interested in transforming your life, drawing closer to the Creator, and uncovering the deeper meanings and hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
and me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
All right, we are back here at the Tamar Yonah Show on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, and our guest says, America, there's no happy ending. Well, at least for now there isn't. It seems to me that whichever side has a victory, the other side is going to be pretty upset about that. And we have discussed about a possible, God forbid, civil war. And I wanted our guest now, Alex Newman from LibertySentinel.org, to give us a scenario of what he sees possibly happening with either side winning. So, Alex, go for it.
Yeah, well, thank you again for having me, Tamar. It's a pleasure to be here. I wrote an article just a few days ago that I published on my website. It's at libertysentinel.org. Be prepared for 2021, the good, bad, and the very ugly. And I kind of outlined some of my thoughts on what would happen if Trump were inaugurated and what would happen if Biden were inaugurated. I think if Trump is inaugurated, if he manages to overturn the fraud, expose the fraud, and shut it down, there is no question in my mind that the radical left, the deep state, the Marxist organizations that have grown so much stronger in recent years, I very much include among them the Black Lives Matter organization, which has 3 co-founders, all of whom are proud of being trained Marxists. You also have Antifa, they call it. They pretend to be anti-fascists. They like to ride on the coattails of the heroic Americans who fought the National Socialists in Germany, when in fact they behave very much like fascists, very much like National Socialists themselves in terms of their hatred, in terms of wanting to destroy and shut down free speech and opposition. It's very grotesque. And I think what will happen if Trump manages to stay in is you'll have terror mobs out in the street setting our cities on fire, murdering police officers, targeting Trump supporters, targeting politicians. In fact, just today, one of Trump's lawyer's assistants had a drive-by shooting at their house. We're going to see more and more of this. Actually, one of the senators who is challenging the election fraud in the U.S. Senate, Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri, had a mob show up at his house today and threaten his wife and his newborn baby. Unbelievable. And this is even before the election fraud has been exposed and overturned on a broad scale. So I think if Trump manages to stop this, and I still think that's a real possibility, the chaos that will be unleashed will be unprecedented. We'll have the fake media claiming that Trump is behaving like a dictator. We might even have this abomination that called the United Nations try to step in and say that Trump is being undemocratic, and this might require international intervention by the so-called world community. Very much along the lines of what they do to Israel on a regular basis, constant demonization, constant attacks, constant efforts to paint the state of Israel as a pariah, as an illegitimate nation. I think we would see very similar things happening against the United States if it looked clear that Trump was going to succeed in overturning this, partly because Trump has been so adamant about exposing globalism. He has removed the United States from all these UN agencies. He's stopped the demonization of Israel. He actually got us out of the UNRWA, and on and on and on.
And NAFTA.
So we would see, yeah, exactly, so many different terrible globalist agreements and agencies Trump has stood against. And so I think it would be very violent. It would be a very, very difficult time. We'd see an incredible economic crisis. And, to be honest, the economic crisis has been brewing for decades. No matter who is inaugurated, I think we're going to see a massive decline in the value of the dollar. The middle class is being destroyed right now. So the economic turmoil is baked into the cake already. But I think the violence and the media campaign will be insane if Trump manages to stop this. If Biden
wait. Before you get to Biden, is there a good chance, do you think? I hear rumors about there being states like California, Oregon, Washington, and maybe New York and these other Democratic states on the East Coast doing cessation. I mean, just like they said, not my president, not my president. They might say, again, we don't recognize his winning. He's not my president, and we're not going to pay federal taxes. I mean, we already saw what happened in Portland, in Seattle, when they had the autonomous zones, and the governors and the mayors forbade Trump from bringing in national troops in order to quell the violence there. They didn't want to have anything to do with the federal government, and they might just say, well, we're not going to pay taxes to you because we don't even recognize you. And therefore, that's basically a de facto cessation from the nation.
Yeah, I think it's a very real possibility. In fact, we've seen top leaders of the state of California openly making pseudo treaties with the mass murdering dictatorship in communist China. I think secession is a very real possibility. In fact, on both sides, we have, just to give you an example, the head of the Republican Party in Texas, Colonel Allen West, a very honorable man, black man, actually served in Congress representing my state, the state of Florida. Now he's moved down to Texas. And he said after this fraudulent election, look, if we're going to have fraudulent national elections, I think Texas is going to have to seriously consider forming an alliance with other states that respect the Constitution, that do want legitimate elections, and we're going to have to secede. We're going to have to create our own union. So on both sides,
I heard that too.
You have very serious talk of secession right now, Tamar.
Okay, and so now, if Biden should win, if Donald Trump for some reason cannot prove the fraud, and the media has already called the win of Biden, so what would happen then?
That would be very problematic as well. You have at least 80 million Americans who would go to war, maybe even literally, to back the president of the United States. And so I think a lot would depend on what Trump does. If Trump urges everybody to stand down, it's possible that the United States could resume its slow descent into the abyss of tyranny and godlessness and basically the destruction of our republic as we have known it. That's a possibility. We will still have the economic crisis. I think we'll see very serious moves in multiple conservative states to leave the union. We'll see massive defiance by Republican states. You'll have Republican governors and Republican legislatures standing up very vigorously to illegitimate federal laws, federal statutes, federal executive orders. You know, when Biden's been threatening to do even gun confiscation, right? He said he was going to come get everybody's AR-14s, setting aside the fact that there's no such thing as an AR-14. There are at least 24 states I can think of off the top of my head where there's no chance that would fly. You would have sheriffs arresting federal agents who tried to enforce anything idiotic like that. So it would devolve, I think, very quickly into mayhem.
Let me jump in for one moment, and I just want to share a meme that was going around. I don't remember it exactly, but it said something like 50 million people in America own guns, while the other side doesn't even know what bathroom to use. So
it's so true.
Yeah.
It's so
okay.
true.
So go ahead. So Biden wins. What happens?
Yeah, so I mean, it's true. There are probably 400 million firearms in private hands in America. The overwhelming majority of those are in the hands of conservatives.
Right.
The overwhelming majority of the armed forces is conservative,
right,
and would certainly side with President Trump in any kind of dispute. And the establishment knows this. But, regardless of who ends up taking power, I think there are certain things that we can count on. The dollar is going to continue to decline. The unrest and the polarization that we've seen in the United States over the last decade is just going to continue accelerating, probably to the breaking point. And I think it's almost guaranteed it's going to get ugly. There's a very real chance it gets violent. And I think the deep state is hoping to capitalize on that to discredit the United States, destroy the United States, and move the world closer to their vision, which is essentially global feudalism, right? They've been telling us now openly, we're going to get rid of private property. We're going to have global governance. We're going to divide the world up into regions. And of course, Israel is very much a target of this as well. You've got the Council on Foreign Relations, one of the key deep state organizations in the United States. They've been promoting this idea for years that there needs to be a Middle Eastern Union that's going to bring together the Kurds and the Jews and the Arabs and the Persians and even some of the North Africans, all in this big monstrosity along the lines of the European Union. And, I know many Jews who are not going to tolerate that, but the whole world now is in the crosshairs of these people. And if they can neutralize and get rid of the United States and really the conservative element of the United States, it will be much simpler for them to get away with that.
All right. In the last minute that we have, we always hear about the October surprise, and now I've interviewed someone who's talking about a January surprise. That could be that there could be a war between Iran and the United States, and we know that America and Israel have been working together to try to stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons, and there's been a lot of tension, and even perhaps hoping that Iran will somehow strike in order to give an excuse to take out the Islamic regime there. Do you think anything's going to happen with Iran?
It's a possibility, but I think the Iranians would be very foolish to start a provocation right now. Trump has indicated over and over again that he does not want to take the United States, the American people, the U.S. armed forces into more wars abroad. However, he's also shown a willingness to fight if and when it's necessary. And so if there were some sort of provocation, it's not outside the realm of possibility that Congress would declare war and Trump would act. That would be an added complication to all the turmoil that we're dealing with already. But, after the year 2020, who would be surprised by anything, right?
Right. But I'm just thinking, it kind of like takes the focus away. It's distraction. We have a war now with Iran. We have to stick together, America. What was that famous movie, Canadian Bacon?
Wag the Dog. Yeah. Well, Wag the Dog, too. They start a fake war to keep everybody's eyes off the political fraud. So.
Right. All right. And so in the last minute we have, what would you like to leave us with?
Well, thank you for having me on again, and I do hope that the people of Israel will keep America in their prayers. Again, we're at a very, very difficult moment in our history, potentially the most difficult. It's not even guaranteed that the United States will survive as a free nation, so I hope you guys will stand with us. If you want to know more, you can check out my website, libertysentinel.org. I'm also the senior editor at the New American Magazine. That's at thenewamerican.com. I write for the Epic Times. That's at theepictimes.com. And education is my real passion, folks. Protect your children from godless indoctrination. It's happening in Israel. It's happening in the United States. It's happening all over the planet. Mm-hmm. The UN is involved with UNESCO. Our children are precious. We've got to protect them, and so is individual liberty. Yeah, I mean, this new generation we have is just so foreign to our values and to their knowledge of history, and how they've been brainwashed into thinking that it's okay to burn books today and all sorts of crazy things that we were frightened of. 1984, Fahrenheit 451. Alex Newman, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thanks so much for having me, Tamar.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
If you're hearing this message, everyone else can too. Advertise with Israel News Talk Radio and get your message out to people. We'll build a personalized package for you. Contact advertising at israelnewstalkradio.com.
Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey, this is Jake in Anchorage, Alaska, and I love listening to all the super interesting interviews and up-to-date information on what's happening in Israel.
Hello, this is Anna King, originally from London, now living in Israel. And what can I say? Israel News Talk Radio is my cup of tea.
My name is Bhaskar. I'm from India, and I love listening because you get to know the truth and wonderful voices from this lovely country.
Mom! Okay, wait a minute. Hi, this is Chava Dax, and I'm calling from the rolling hills of Ma'ale Adumim, just north of Jerusalem. I always listen to Israel News Talk Radio to get all the latest news and commentary and to keep me up to date every day.
This is Sarah Dax from Ma'ale Adumim, and I'm 12. I wish Israel News Talk Radio was boring so my mom wouldn't listen to it all the time. Mom!
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.